So the first story we have today comes from CNBC, and the title here is Delta sues CrowdStrike after widespread IT outage that caused thousands of cancellations. This has obviously been in the works for a while. We've talked about it several times in the past, but it has finally landed. Delta is indeed suing CrowdStrike in Georgia for the low price, $500 million, claiming that they have lost $380 million in revenue as a result of the breach, and then another $170 million in costs. So that's a big number. And they're claiming in the lawsuit.
Plus, they want punitive damages and legal fees go even higher.
Yeah, certainly with legal fees would be on that sum of money would be quite large. Yes,
I bet.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because the allegations are that CrowdStrike breached their contract and they were negligent in the processing of their agreement. So the negligence, by the way, doesn't surprise me. I actually expected that was going to be the case. It surprises me that they're pointing to a contract violation. So I have not had a chance to read the actual complaint. So it'll be very interesting to see if they enumerate exactly how they're asserting the contract was breached. They do say, by the way, that they're asserting that CrowdStrike was derelict in their duty. They did not test. They were, I'm trying to find the exact wording, but basically they were cutting corners to benefit themselves financially, was their allegations.
Yeah, I think you predicted quite accurately a couple of episodes ago when we talked about this last, that Delta would have to prove gross negligence to overcome the terms and condition sort of indemnity that CrowdStrike has in their typical terms and conditions. We have no idea what contract Delta and CrowdStrike signed. However, discovery, if we get to that point, I think will be fascinating to follow. If this goes the distance, this actually could have a very large and long range ramification and widespread, that's where it's ramification, I think, on the computer security industry.
To me, by the way, this feels like one that's going to get settled out of court. But having said that, I don't know for sure. I will say, I think that Delta has a lot more to lose in the discovery process than CrowdStrike has, because I think CrowdStrike has publicly self-immolated. Like, they've gone in front of Congress, they've written blog posts about what happened, and I'm sure there's some details that have yet to see the light of day. But I think that CrowdStrike's response, by the way, is a little, I guess, a little bitter. They said, quote, "While we aimed to reach a business resolution that puts customers first, Delta has chosen a different path," a CrowdStrike spokesperson told CNBC in an email. "Delta's claims are based on disproven information, demonstrate a lack of understanding of how modern cybersecurity works, and reflect a desperate attempt to shift the blame for its slow recovery away from its failure to modernize its antiquated IT infrastructure."
Southwest would like word about antiquated IT infrastructure. And how
I think all the airlines have some version of an antiquated IT infrastructure, but that I think, by the way, is the downside for Delta, right? They're gonna have their IT practices put on full display.
Yeah, I didn't see it in this article, and so take this with a grain of salt. But I had read elsewhere that CrowdStrike had previously offered $30 million in compensation to Delta to settle. So I don't know if that's true. I read it in some article somewhere, but I've been looking for it and I haven't seen it in other articles. So I don't know if that was folklore that got reported somewhere or if it's accurate. But if that is true, it's interesting that it's a number that CrowdStrike came back with as an opening of negotiation, if that happened.
They did. So they did lower CrowdStrike, I should say, they being CrowdStrike, did lower their full year guidance on profits because of the package that they're putting together to compensate customers who were harmed by the incident. So it's entirely possible that they had some formulation that resulted in Delta getting a proposed $30 million. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me. I don't think that sounds out of character.
One side piece of this I noticed, I just was curious how CrowdStrike stock was doing. So they're a public company. Like the most recent high before the event came in at $377. Their low after the event, they bottomed out at $217. They're back up already to $320 to $300 range. Now, this lawsuit, I'm sure, will hurt them again, but it's interesting just on that event, how much they've already recovered in their stock price in the last 6 months.
Yeah, I have a feeling that, and this is not unique to this particular situation. We see similar things with companies that have gotten breached, and I don't think it even happens all that often anymore, where their stock price will take a hit and then it'll recover. And a lot of people will say, oh, I'm never shopping at Target or Home Depot or wherever. I'm never shopping there again. Well, you do. And their stock price recovers. And I think that realistically, that recovery is a reflection of confidence in the market. Their future earnings are not going to be materially hampered by whatever's going on. So yeah, they're going to, even with this lawsuit, even if they lose, they could have to pay out, let's say they have to pay out $1 billion. That's a lot of money, but it doesn't necessarily have a material impact on CrowdStrike's potential future growth.
Yeah. Yeah, long term.
Maybe it diverts money away from R&D, but I'm sure
they have a market cap right now of just over $73.5 billion. That's pretty healthy.
That's healthy.
Yeah, their earnings per year revenue was $3.516 billion last year. Just looking, source of this is CNBC's page on CrowdStrike. I'm hopefully relatively accurate. Gross margin their gross margin 75.37%. That is insanely high gross margin. Wow. Anyway, so I think what we're saying is that we should
welcome to the technical analysis podcast.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're going to start a hedge fund buying on bad news in cybersecurity companies and just waiting for the bounce back. Some people might. Who knows? This is not investment advice. I'm not your investment advisor. If you do it and it makes you money, send me a Starbucks card. Okay. But back to the industry at large. If this goes to the distance as we were saying earlier, and CrowdStrike loses a bunch of money on this, I wonder what kind of chilling effect that might have on cutting edge innovation in cybersecurity defense. And does that give the bad guys a potential advantage if the defenders suddenly get cold feet about being aggressive in defending against the bad guys?
Certainly possible, but there is some moral hazard in the whole no good deed goes unpunished. Now, like a difficult situation because clearly CrowdStrike could have done better, probably a lot better. But here we are. At the same time, from a narrative perspective, what you just said makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, we see other companies like SentinelOne and some of the others already doing the whole vulture thing. So
right.
No, I don't know. It's a good question. There was one other thing I found interesting in here is Delta asserted that they had auto updates turned off.
Yeah, I did see that. And yet it still came down anyway. I think that I haven't ever admin CrowdStrike. Okay, so take with a grain of salt. But I gotta think there's different options for automatic updates of different varieties and different types, right? Is this an automatic agent update? Is this an automatic definition update? Is this an automatic? There's probably different choices. And I'm assuming they had maybe something off and something else on that they didn't realize.
Yeah, I think it was agent updates, and this issue was in their channel file, which I don't know. As we've talked about in the past, I think that was one of the concessions that CrowdStrike recently said that they were making a change on, that they were going to be treating those channel file updates as actual code updates.
And giving admins more control over their rollout schedule and methodology.
Right. Exactly.
So, don't know. We will see. I will watch this one. I definitely want to find the text of the lawsuit. Did a quick search before the show, and I ran out of time, and I couldn't find it. It's supposedly in Fulton County, which is one of our main counties here in Georgia. Their superior court system. I was searching the records, found a lot of other interesting lawsuits that Delta's involved with, but not this one. A lot of garnishing of wages going on with Delta employees, just for the record.
Interesting. Interesting.
That could be the case with any major employers. I have no idea what normal is for how many garnishing of wage lawsuits happen, but it was.
They are a very large employer here in
one of our biggest
Georgia area,
I think.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yep. If this doesn't get settled out of court, we'll be talking about this crazy thing probably till 2030.
Tis true. It'll be a long cycle. But you know what? I think you're right there. I think this will get settled.
Yeah.
I don't think it's in anybody's best interest for this to go all the way.
No.
The question is,
the only people, this is one of those situations where the only people who win are the lawyers.
Look, to be clear, I'm also not like taking sides here. I'm not rooting for or against either of these companies. I bet some of the discovery that would come out would not look good for anybody. And I think they know that, but I think this is how lawyers maximize their settlement options.
Yeah. So just to go meta for a second, I think I also find it interesting how both sides are throwing each other under the bus. Like CrowdStrike is saying, like, this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't had this old ass infrastructure. And Delta is saying this would never have happened if you hadn't been cutting corners. And so they're just like pushing each other down in front of a bus, trying to see which one who actually gets run over. But I think the peril there is you're always one step away from something bad happening like this. And if Delta does want to go all the way, they are going to necessarily air all their dirty laundry from a security perspective, from an IT management perspective. And on the converse, CrowdStrike they've already experienced a lot of discomfort. I think they've got more ahead of them, but not as much as I think as Delta does, though.
That's a good point. CrowdStrike has already had to open the kimono before Congress and everybody else, and Delta really hasn't had to. So that's a very good point. We'll see.